Today I'm going to look at an ignition switch replacement for my 2013 Honda Accord. According to the parts guys at AutoZone, this also was good for the 2019 Honda Accord, so I'm taking it to be good for all those years in between. Before we get into the actual switch replacement, let's check two things just to make sure that it is the ignition switch you need to replace. First on my list of things that need to be checked is the battery. Ideally, I'd take it out of the car, but you can do this in the car as well. Just disconnect the ground wire. Make sure you charge the battery up fully, either with the alternator or with an external charger above at least 13 volts. After the battery is fully charged, disconnect the charger and or leave the ground wire disconnected. Then walk away for about 18 or 24 hours and come back and see how much the battery voltage has dropped. In my case, this is a good battery. Now, if the battery voltage drops down in the 12.4, 12.3 range, then you might have a bad battery, and it'd be a real good idea to have a professional check the battery for you before you proceed with the switch. Number two on my list of things to check, the alternator. You want to make sure it's up to snuff and doing exactly what it's supposed to do. My recommendation is connect up your voltmeter, start the car. You should see the alternator come in at least briefly and charge the battery back up. Then the voltage will drop way back, and it looks like the alternator is no longer charging the battery. Once the battery settles out at this lower voltage, the next thing to do is go ahead and turn on the headlights for the car. You should see the alternator jump back up and start charging the battery again. If the alternator does not come back on and start recharging the battery after the lights have been turned on, then it's definitely time to start taking a look at the alternator. Ideally, of course, it would stay on like most other vehicles, but Honda does things differently with load sensing circuitry. So the minute you turn the lights back off, the alternator is going to charge for a little bit longer and then turn itself back off and go back to straight battery voltage. Okay, if everything checks out so far, the next step, of course, is to disconnect the negative side of the battery. Next, it's time to move back into the interior of the car, and we've got to get this lower panel back off. It just clips on. Just make sure you pull straight out on it and don't try to twist it in any way. It should pull straight out towards you, just like you're pulling it straight toward the steering wheel. After you have the panel free, the next step is to disconnect 3 wiring connectors. While not absolutely mandatory, it's probably advised to avoid breaking something, especially this plastic panel, when you're getting ready to pull the steering wheel down a little bit and you're already in tight quarters to begin with. This will get the panel completely out of the way and make the next step a whole lot easier. Take your time with these little connectors. They shouldn't be too hard to get out. They're squeeze type and then pull straight out towards you. Here's a little close-up of those connectors showing how the squeeze action works. Just take your time here and be gentle with them. The next item on the list is a steering wheel cover bolt down at the lower bottom rear of the steering wheel cover. Eagle-eye viewers may take a look and see that, yeah, I've changed this one out. It's 1024 now. I kept having problems trying to thread the old one back in, and it proved to be easier to use a 1024 in this location because of the larger washer. Now we need to separate the two covers. The upper cover is just snapped in place. The lower cover still has 2 screws to get out. We've got to take out a little bit later once we get this upper cover off. Again, you can just pop it straight up. Shouldn't be very difficult at all if you can get a screwdriver in there just to wedge it up a little bit. Now we get into the first uninitiated, well, how the devil do they do that routine. At first glance, with the steering wheel in neutral position, you can't access these 2 little screws. But if you turn the steering wheel first one way and then the other, you'll have access to these 2 screws. You can put the screwdriver straight in, take them out without any trouble at all. Once you have all 3 screws out, you can grab the cover at the upper corners right next to the steering wheel, and you should be able to pull straight down, and the cover should drop right off. Just take your time here. Make sure you're not caught at the ignition switch on the right side. After you're sure you cleared the ignition switch, the cover should drop straight down. As some of you have probably already guessed, yeah, I've been in this ignition switch once before. Turned out that it actually was a battery problem the first time around, but after trying to get the ignition switch out and not knowing the trick I'm going to show you now, I cheated and replaced the screw with a longer screw so it would be easier to get the screwdriver on it. The existing screw is so far back in there, it's difficult to get the Phillips centered on the screw to take the screw back out. The second trick is if you drop the steering wheel down to its lowest position, then you can work a screwdriver between the sheet metal and the rest of the dash assembly to get to this screw without having to go at it from a different angle. Here's the second somewhat hidden screw from underneath the dash looking straight up toward the steering wheel and the switch. You definitely got to take this one out too. Now it's time to disconnect the wiring harness. In this case, the first thing to do is this little clip. Press in, then pull straight out on the clip. After that, you should be able to disconnect the wiring harness. It's going to be tight, so you get to wiggle for a little while. Try to get the wiring harness to separate from the actual switch, but it definitely will come out. Now you should have a switch in one hand and the wiring harness in the other. And here's the switch. The AutoZone guys say that this is the same switch, 2013 to 2019. Not sure if it goes back earlier or not. Okay, a new switch will set you back somewhere around 35 to 70 bucks. AutoZone in this case had the best price for me. The rest of this video I'm going to show how I took my switch apart and proceeded to try to fix it. If that doesn't interest you, I'll see you on the next video. For those of you that want to see how the switch is put together and see if you can repair the switch without having to buy a new one, stay tuned. We're going to get into that here shortly. There are 4 little locking tabs on this switch with the outer casing. 2 small screwdrivers and some very careful levering with a little bit of prying, of course, on the inside with respect to the outside will get the outer case off of the switch. Again, go slow, minimum force. You don't want to raise these tabs any more than you have to. They will break off, and after that, you're into it for a new switch. Now you got the outer cover off. You need to take out the inner cover. In this case, there are 4 little white locking tabs there as well. Same procedure, general levering on this to push the tabs in, then lift straight out with the white portion with respect to the black portion. Now that I've got the switch apart, it's time for the inspection. If you look real closely toward the bottom of the switch on this last picture, where I've got the little pointer showing, there's a little dimple that's in the copper. In this particular case, this probably was where my problem was. Some thick grease was getting in there, and on top of being slightly burned, it was not making contact on start. So, yes, in my case, it was time for a new switch.